He claimed to have based his view on trauma partly on his own personal experiences, and then says, I can't elaborate. I think that's significant because it's not unheard of in wealthy families for there to be, narcissism, verbal abuse, psychological abuse, sometimes physical abuse. Hey, it's Jordan. I am in Flint, Michigan, East Palestine, Ohio, Tumwa, Iowa. Please support the only independent outlet on the ground covering what the corporate media covers up. It's Jordan with Status Coup. Hope you had a nice holiday. As America's fascination and, frankly, growing support for Luigi Mangione, the alleged shooter of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson, as that support grows, I believe there was a fairly significant news development that kind of fell under the rug, swept under the rug right before Christmas. If you recall, when this story first broke, it was revealed that Mangione had had a 2-hour conversation with a British journalist in May. That journalist's name is Gurwinder Bhogal. Bhogal had went on CNN a few weeks ago, shared, some of his interactions with Mangione. But right before Christmas, he wrote more about those interactions, and he revealed, or chose not to, something that I found quite interesting pertaining to Mangione and the idea or his observation that Mangione had experienced some type of trauma. He would not elaborate, though. Let me first show you what I'm talking about. This was posted by the British journalist on the 22nd of December, so a few days before Christmas. Title, I met the alleged CEO assassin. And again, this is pretty important because obviously prosecutors and the defense attorneys representing Mangione want to get into his state of mind, his personal experiences, his physical trauma. We know he had severe chronic back pain, but the concept of jury nullification and jury sympathy, any information about his personal experiences, his background, potential trauma would be significant. Bhogal, again, who talked to him for 2 hours in May, writes, somehow from there, we ended up talking about intergenerational trauma. And it was here that we had our only significant disagreement. Luigi implied that he believed trauma could be directly inherited and that it accumulated in families, much like generational wealth. And we know that his family was very wealthy. Mangione claimed to have based this view partly on his own personal experiences. I can't elaborate. It sounded to me like he was describing a pseudoscientific misinterpretation of epigenetics popularized by activists, academics, and books like The Body Keeps the Score. I'll get to that in a minute, but I want to zero in on this. I am not an online sleuth who looks for clues under, every cover. I'm a journalist, but my spidey sense was raised when the journalist who spoke for him for 2 hours in May, so this isn't years ago, this year, he claimed to have based his view on trauma partly on his own personal experiences, and then says, I can't elaborate. I have reached out to Bhogal now twice, asking to interview him. He did go on CNN, so hopefully he'll get back to me. I can't say whether him saying I can't elaborate means he's choosing not to elaborate, as in Mangione shared details of alleged trauma he suffered in his family or from his family. Maybe it wasn't him, but overall trauma in his family that he observed. I don't know if he means I can't elaborate, meaning he doesn't know what the personal trauma is, but Mangione referred to trauma. I don't know. But the way I read that, I can't elaborate, is he's saying, I'm choosing not to elaborate. Could be wrong. But I think that's significant because it's not unheard of in wealthy families for there to be, narcissism, verbal abuse, psychological abuse, sometimes physical abuse. Not all, but a lot of the most wealthy people are, textbook narcissistic. and abusive to their kids, mostly emotional, but sometimes physical. So I would like to know what he's talking about here that he can't elaborate, or what Mangione shared with him about personal trauma. Again, might not seem like anything to you, but when they're talking about, intergenerational trauma and Mangione's personal experiences, I don't know why this British journalist didn't share that or go into that at all when he was interviewed by CNN, which we'll show you parts of in a minute. I want to show you this because Bogal said, Mangione was referring to what he described as a pseudoscientific misinterpretation of epigenetics, popularized by activist academics and books like The Body Keeps the Score. Here is the author of The Body Keeps the Score describing trauma and some of the elements of trauma. This is what Bogal said Mangione was misinterpreting.
Traumatized people have a tremendous problem experiencing pleasure and joy. But the core issue is our hormones and our physiological impulses that have to do with survival. Your body keeps mobilizing itself to fight. You have all kinds of immunological abnormalities, endocrine abnormalities, and that really devastates your physical health also. Oftentimes the physical problems are longer lasting than the mental problems.
So that was the author of the book that Bogal, the British journalist, had basically told Mangione was pseudoscience, and he kind of poo-pooed this. I'm not an expert on epigenetics or any of that to opine, but I am an expert on when things don't smell right. And I find it very significant that this journalist, who was on CNN, I believe it was an 8-minute segment, fairly long for CNN or cable news, is kind of alluding to some type of intergenerational trauma that Mangione talked about. We know about his back pain. We know about the surgeries, his disdain for healthcare. But if you are a defense attorney, or especially in a case like this where his fame is rising, I mean, his sweater that he wore to his arraignment is selling out on online shopping. There's Luigi merchandise going around. Reddit groups for Luigi Mangione. I mean, he's kind of becoming a modern day Robin Hood or, the Joker. There's a lot of support for him, and juries are made of human beings. So anything that his attorneys could use, obviously there's a lot of traumatized people that don't commit murder, but if there is trauma and they could use that to his defense to kind of allude to what made him allegedly do what he did, then you got to get 12 people on a jury to agree. And there can be holdouts that sympathize with him in addition to their own personal stories or horror stories with the healthcare industry. And I believe anything that could come out about trauma pertaining to Mangione could be used by the defense to look for jury nullification, which I'll get into more in a minute. But I want to show you just a little bit more of what Bogal wrote right before Christmas, because I find it fairly significant. He also wrote, "In my limited interactions with Luigi, I never got the impression he had spinal or mental issues, but I did get the sense he felt alienated. He often decried the lack of social connection in the modern world, and on a couple of occasions, he lamented that the people around him were on a different wavelength to him." Now, I'm not going to play armchair psychologist, but if you do have some trauma in your life, whether it's physical trauma, emotional trauma, abuse, obviously that could lead to you feeling like a bit of a loner. And he was wealthy, but I don't know if he saw a therapist. We know that there's a very thin connection between physical pain and emotional pain. But, if he had some type of trauma that we don't know about, that I'm sure, his defense attorneys are doing a full analysis of, that could play a big part in some type of jury nullification. Let me show you this clip from CNN. This is CNN's legal analyst talking about that this case does pose a fairly high risk of jury nullification, which in English is basically the jury thinks he committed the crime, but because of their own sense of justice, basically find that the crime, even though it is legally a crime, was justified, and therefore find the defendant not guilty. That's basically what jury nullification is. Here's CNN's legal analyst saying that jury nullification is definitely an option here.
But on the other side, if you were a prosecutor, Ellie, and you have been a prosecutor, would you worry about the fact that Mangione has gained this level of fame, even popularity on social media? I mean, how hard does that make it to get a fair jury?
I would be concerned. I wouldn't necessarily lose sleep over it, although you're always a little bit nervous about the possibility of jury nullification. And for sure, this is the highest risk of nullification that I've seen in a long time, given the fame and fandom that this guy has somehow gained over social media. But it's important to keep in mind, there are checks in place. First of all, the jury selection process. People who are overtly biased in his favor, people who've been posted on social media, that kind of thing, they'll be weeded out. They'll never even make it onto a jury. The other thing is the whole trial process has the effect of sort of forcing people to get serious. It's really hard to sit through weeks worth of overwhelming evidence that this person shot his victim in the back and then just say, heck with it. I kind of like this guy, or I saw some social media meme. So it's always in play, but I think it's important to understand we do have processes that sort of filter that kind of thing out.
I don't know. I know a lot of people that are very good liars who perhaps didn't write anything on social media about this or their hatred for the healthcare companies, and could appear that they're unbiased and neutral on this, but deep down go in with a mission to, free Luigi Mangione and to find him not guilty. So sure, I mean, you will have a fierce battle over jury selection. I'm sure you've seen movies or Law and Order where the jury selection process is very detailed. But in this case, I think obviously there's a lot of people who have trauma that doesn't condone murder. But in this case, when the victim, many people consider to be a mass murderer, talking about Brian Thompson, anything that comes out that adds sympathy to Luigi beyond what we already know, the physical pain, the back pain, anything about trauma, intergenerational issues, stuff in his family. And there's been reporting on his family. One of the wealthiest families in the Baltimore area own their own hospital care facilities. I believe 9 of them, long-term care centers. They own a lavish golf course. I mean, not all, but a lot of wealthy families got a lot of skeletons in the closet. So it remains to be seen what comes out pertaining to any trauma he experienced. Again, speculation. I don't fully know, but more could come out. There was also more that the British journalist revealed pertaining to his conversations with Mangione, going a little deeper than what he said on CNN, particularly about Mangione's, I won't say Unabomber-like mentality, but definitely had a very healthy skepticism and distaste and fear of tech zapping us of our agency and our ability to think for ourselves. Bogal in the PC wrote right before Christmas about his interactions with Mangione. He writes, but it wasn't just Japan. Luigi believed people everywhere were becoming NPCs, which are non-player characters, referring to video games, essentially people just who don't think for themselves, increasingly living their lives as a series of reflex reactions rather than consciously choosing their behaviors. Japan was merely the canary in the coal mine. The West was following closely behind, driven by tech companies intent on mesmerizing us into servile consumers. Luigi feared that once we'd surrendered our agency, we'd surrender everything else. And I mean, this we know about, that he talked about the Japanese are addicted to porn and video games, particularly men. But this goes a little further, what I just read to you, in terms of it seems that he believed technology was basically brainwashing the masses. So it wasn't just that he was focused on the for-profit predatory healthcare system. He was focused, I would say, on big tech and its cross-section with capitalism basically making humans like robots, mindless robots. Let me play you the clip of Bogal on CNN a couple weeks ago, where he goes further into Mangione's beliefs when it came to tech.
He's talking about NPC behavior, which stands for non-player characters, which appear in video games. And NPCs tend to behave very predictably, right? They don't think for themselves. So he, and in his exchange with you, he writes, Japan is peak NPCville. Scary lack of free will in this country. I'll have to tell you a story from my morning today where I saw a dude have a seizure on the street and run 2 blocks to the police station. They followed me to help, but refused to walk across any empty streets if the stoplight was red, even while the guy was seizing on the ground. Luigi. This is his, I guess, his view about the lack of connection that people could have for each other. Can you tell me more about how important this overall topic was in his psyche?
It took, I'd say about 90% of the 2-hour conversation we had was about sort of the effects of technology on agency, and well, not just technology, but culture as well. But he believed culture was downstream of technology. He believed that it was the technological developments that were causing the cultural changes that were resulting in things like what he would call NPC behaviors. So he believed amongst the things that he believed was taking people's agency away from them was shallow entertainment. He really resonated with an article that I'd written called The Intellectual Obesity Crisis, which is about useless information and how we are addicted to useless information because it's like shallow entertainment. And he was very concerned with things like online porn. Like, he believed that a lot of men were not going out and meeting women because they were addicted to porn. He was really concerned about video games. He believed that people were not making accomplishments. They were not accomplishing things in the real world because they were getting sort of these dopamine hits from video games. And he also believed social media addiction was a big problem that was taking people's agency away from them as well.
So at the end of the day, I mean, I think this story, and why we've been covering it so much, it's not just about healthcare. It's not just about Luigi Mangione. It's not just about Brian Thompson. It's about the entire for-profit corruption in this country, the United Corporations of America. It's about the 40 to 50-year neoliberal bubble popping. It's about, for decades, when you economically squeeze people to the point of them breaking, economically, mentally, spiritually, when you take from people, which is basically the for-profit middleman in healthcare. These costs are completely unnecessary. It's just going to Brian Thompson shareholders. It's not, most of the healthcare costs we're spending aren't going to actual healthcare, as there's been studies and data that show. UnitedHealthcare in particular, most of the fees we're paying weren't going to actual quality healthcare. It was going to administrative, shareholders, et cetera. But this is about the whole system and our government basically being purchased by for-profit, predatory industries like the healthcare industry, the privatization of industries. And that's why I think it's going to be very, very hard. I think people are going to be sympathetic to him on that jury. He has a great defense attorney who was the number 2 in the New York City District Attorney's Office. And if more comes out about alleged trauma that he experienced, buckle up. We shall see what happens.